So what I'm going to talk about today is what happened when a colleague of mine, in fact a colleague of Stephen's as well, Marianne Kennan, and I wrote a debate piece which was called, now I have scheduled some tweets to go live as I'm talking. Because we're behind time, I've had to guess the time, so goodness knows what's going to happen, but I am tweeting all these links, so they should come up if you follow the hashtag. This was a debate piece that we did called, and what we were arguing was that open access gets blamed for things that are really actually problems with the scholarly communication system. It's the people say thing that Stephen just mentioned. Now, the premise of the article that we said was that we sort of gave a very quick background on open access. We were assuming that the audience had some idea about open access, but we were saying OA publishers are predatory, OA is too expensive, and that self-depositing papers into a repository is going to cause subscriptions to fall, that all three of those are myths, that they are actually issues in the scholarly communication system and not a problem for open access. So we looked at each of those and then we sort of suggested some other areas that really should be talked about in the area of scholarly communication. Now this was a debate piece, so I'll give you some idea about the timing. We were first approached in September 2013 to write this debate piece, and because Marianne was really flat out, she sort of didn't do anything about it. We accepted in February 2014, we said we would do this piece. We submitted our first paper, the big chunky 10,000 word debate piece in May. And then we had to amend it based on editors' comments. The rebuttals came through in November. We then had to write a rejoinder to the rebuttals, and then that was sent in February. We were told in May the publications with the production editor would be out any time. That any time happened to be August, so I don't know what any time really means. So to give you an idea, it was really 2 years from concept to production and 18 months from when we started work to actually seeing the light of day. So what happened after we submitted our debate, the first piece? Well, not much, for a long time, because the editor then tried to find 5 people to respond, to write a 5,000 word rejoinder to or rebuttal to our debate piece. Now, we gave all sorts of names, we talked about funders, and we gave specific names and contact details. We ourselves contacted people who were funders, library staff, research managers, editors, publishers, anyone who in this space. But we had real trouble getting people to reply, and it could have been busyness, it could have been not wanting to put your head over the parapet. In the end, we ended up with 4 of the 5 people who wrote those rebuttals were actually researchers in the information science field, which is the field this journal is in. So what happened then? In those 4 people wrote the same kind of response. So this one. Before discussing this in detail, we need to know what the current situation is regarding OA publishing in information science. We now discuss 4 fundamental points regarding scholarly communication. Before examining the current state of scholarly publication, let us set some parameters for this discussion. While blah, 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 I think the argument would benefit from more systematically analysing the current system of scholarly publication. So what all 4 of those people did was said, this hasn't been done and I'm doing it now and here it is. None of them actually addressed any of the questions that we put up in terms of the debate about that open access is being blamed for problems with scholarly communication. They all did their own assessment of what they thought the scholarly communication situation was. Now, that in itself is kind of interesting, and as an aside to what I'm talking about today, on a professional note, what that told us was that because each of them at the end of their own analyses came to the idea that open access is a good idea, that's great. But if this is the process that every researcher has to go through to come to grips with the idea of open access and run forward with it, we are never going to get there, right? So engagement has not been working. We've been doing engagement for over 10 years. I personally have been doing engagement for over 10 years. And you know, Albert Einstein's thing about you keep doing the same thing expecting a different result, it's not working. We need to enable the academic community. It needs to happen around them automatically. It's the only way that we're going to actually get really large upscale of this process. But back to the topic here. The first thing is this was actually professionally insulting for both Marianne and I. We had to very carefully talk to these people and say, you know how you did that analysis of the quoted so-and-so and so-and-so to 2012? That's based on research that dates back to 1973. And so we had to very gently say, because Marianne publishes in this field, so she can't just go and tell people they're a bunch of idiots, so we had to very gently say to these people, what you've done is not news. So what we realised is that the research area of scholarly communication is not well recognised. Now, a research area kind of has two things that kind of make it a research area. One thing is scholarly literature, and the other thing is the language used. And language has already come up today. So in terms of the community, academic communities often have journals or learned societies. So that's how you know that there's a discipline. But the thing about scholarly communication, because it covers everything, it covers all areas of research, the publications about scholarly communication appear all over the place. So they tend to appear in sociology of science or communication journals, librarianship journals, information sciences disciplines. There are two journals specifically about scholarly communication, the Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication and Scholarly and Research Communication. There are two that actually do exist, but otherwise it's very much widespread. There are now offices of scholarly communication in lots of United States universities and now increasingly in the UK, obviously my office being a good example. There aren't any faculties or departments or professorial chairs of scholarly communication. It's not seen yet as a discipline. So let's talk about language. This is an excellent book by Michael Billig. And what he writes is, learn to write badly, how to succeed in the social sciences. It's a very well-written book, it would have to be. And what he's sort of saying is you have to have a lot of education to write this badly. And his argument is that because what people do is they boundary stab by using language. So if you've got particular language and jargon, that's what defines your discipline. So if you are in a discipline that uses vernacular words, like scholarly communication does, it's really difficult. So one of the things we had to do in our rebuttals to the rejoinder to the rebuttals, very confusing, was we had to explain what we meant by publishing and by gold open access and by green open access. And so these are the sorts of words that we're having, even the open access movement. It's not a group of people where we all walk along the street, we are united, because we're not. We've got a lot of different opinions, people who are involved in open access. So the other kind of words I've encountered in an administrative perspective is major problems with the word repository. I was told at my previous institution we couldn't call it an institutional repository, so I produced a very, 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 very long list of all the institutional repositories around the world and said it's not your choice, I'm sorry. And mandate. We can't call it a mandate because we can't tell the researchers what to do. So words are a problem in this area of scholarly communication. Now, another problem is that academics think they know. They think they know all about publishing. It's the I know teaching, I went to school. It's that line of thought. I know all about publishing because I publish, or because I've peer reviewed, or because I'm an editor. That's not necessarily the case. So, our conclusion from all of this experience, which wasn't what we were setting out to do, we were setting out to discuss issues in relation to whether or not these accusations aimed at open access were valid or not, and what we've ended up with is a whole other kind of area. But what we worked out, that the practice of scholarly communication is very different from the study of scholarly communication, that they are two separate things. And really, we've got people in all sorts of academic fields, library staff, administrators, research funders and so on, who are involved in the practice of scholarly communication, but very few people involved in the study. Now that's okay, but what happens is that everyone who has been practicing in this field brings their own level of expertise and knowledge to the table. And so what we need to think about is trying to really make sure that that level is high enough for what they need. So that's the link to the rebuttals. The rejoinder to the rebuttals. Okay, now, when Donald Rumsfeld in 2003 talked about the unknown unknowns, everyone laughed about it and thought it was the stupidest thing they'd ever heard. But I reckon he's got a point. So, researchers don't know about publishing. There's a really big problem with it. And so they're generally held to have a low awareness of publishing issues and open access opportunities. And if you ask a researcher what the copyright status of their most recently published work is, they usually will not know. They will have not kept a copy of the document that they signed, and they're quite shocked when you tell them you're not allowed to put the final version up in ResearchGate. So education is paramount. So the problem is that the master-apprentice system that we've got in Scotland, it's not really a system, the fantasy of master-apprentice is not working. Now, I interviewed in-depth interviews for my PhD which published in 2008 with 43 academics, and I asked them of many questions. How did you find out about the publishing system, and what are you telling your research students? So it was sort of an interesting a sort of comparison. I couldn't compare what their experiences were with one another because they came from different places and different times, but I could see whether that affected what they subsequently did. And it quite often did affect it, either because I had a terrible experience and I'm making sure I've got a good experience now, or I'm replicating the experience that I had because it was good, or I'm replicating the experience I had because it was bad, that I didn't get a leg up, why should they? So we've got sort of instances like it took me years to find out conference papers didn't count. So this researcher thought they were publishing and doing the right thing for a really long time before somebody, it was by chance, that said that she was cited as an unpublished paper in a book. And then she realised that she was unpublished, and that was why she wasn't getting promoted. I don't think anyone's ever told me about publishing. The way I learn about publishing is reading other people's papers by osmosis. That's not particularly effective. So, what about the library community? I've been talking about researchers. So, you personally, where are you on scholarly communications issues? So this is there's various versions of this, 4 stages of unconscious, and this is the kind of unknown comparison, right? So you can't start off with the unconsciously unskilled. You don't even know that you don't know. And you run through to the consciously unskilled, oh, I should find out a bit more about that, to I now know quite a lot, I'm feeling good, to not even thinking about it because it's just inherent. And what we want is people in this space, in the library. And we've already talked about this today. But what we've got is some people are here, and quite a lot of people are here. And a lot of people are here because they're a bit scared. So they're sort of moving slightly into this and thinking, oh, I'm jumping back. So what we need to do is start pushing people down this. So this is a big, big challenge, right? Because it's really difficult to get issues related to scholarly communication even onto the curricula for library courses. Now, Marianne and I have discussed this, and one of the things, because she's gone from being a librarian to doing a PhD about scholarly communication to being a library researcher, so she's now an academic that teaches librarians. Right, so she's gone full circle. And she has trouble, even within her own institution, getting this material onto the agenda. And we suspect it's because the people who coordinate the courses can't see a deficit in their own skill sets. They don't see there's a need for it. I know teaching, I went to school. They think they know all about it, and they don't. So it doesn't get on the agenda. There are almost no courses on repository management. You just got to learn on the job. But even professional training, we've just done a small survey within our institution at Cambridge and talked to people about what sort of training they found useful. And still it came up a lot as being really helpful. But I had a look at the training courses that they offer. They do offer one on institutional repositories and metadata, and they offer one on digital copyright. The word publishing doesn't appear, the word open access doesn't appear. So even in the professional training, which is pretty quick, I would imagine, to build up and develop, it doesn't exist. So, the Association of College and Research Libraries, which is an American association, published this recently, the Scholarly Communication Toolkit, which is really excellent, by the way. And this is I've pulled out the bits that suit my argument, of course, but ACL sees a need to vigorously reorient all facets of library services. And so, because there's a wide variance in the background understanding, what we've just been talking about, but what they're saying is the idea of bringing the full cycle of scholarly communication and how librarians can assist through that process is essential to the continued success of academic libraries. This is really important because we're going to get pushed out of the market if we don't push ourselves back into the market. So what do we need to do? So we've got to shift from the idea of managing academic literature to participating in the generation of it. Learn by doing. So that means things like, well, for a start, reading research. So read the Journal of Librarianship. Write an academic article. Present work at conferences. Offer your services as a peer reviewer or serve on an editorial board. These are all things you can do. Collaborate with your academic community on a project and write about it. So these are all things you can do. Now I just want to point something out. Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication. Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication. Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication. Okay, so that's where the stuff is happening. I would suggest you look at that journal. All right, so thank you.